If you need to combine multiple rows into one row in Excel, this tutorial will solve your problem. Maybe you've already spent some time online trying to get your questions answered, but each video only leaves you with more questions. What if I want to collapse identifier columns? What if I want to combine text first? What if I don't have Excel 365? I've got your back. We'll start with a simple example and then move on to more complex transformations. Stick with me until the end because this tutorial will give you all the tools you need to combine multiple rows into one row in Excel. Hi, I'm Rebecca and I teach Excel users how to create spreadsheets they can be proud of. If you use Excel in any capacity, you're in the right place. No matter what kind of spreadsheet you have, I'm sure it could use a little updating. That's why I created the Spreadsheet Tune-Up, a free training just for you. In 5 short videos, I'll teach you the first steps to optimize any spreadsheet you have. Let's start with the most basic example I can think of combine multiple rows into one, which is if you have a list in a bunch of rows and you want to combine them into one cell. So if you have Microsoft 365, the best function for this is TEXTJOIN, which takes the first argument is a delimiter. So let's say you wanted it to be separated by a comma. You would put in double quotes a comma space. The next argument is ignore empty. I always just use true. Whoops. And then you just select all the text that you want to join. And there it is. I'll wrap this so you can easily see it. It just takes all of these names and combines them into one. Now, if you don't have Microsoft 365, the older version of this is called CONCATENATE. And it's not exactly the same. The only argument is the text. So if you were to select all of this, what it does is it just puts them all together. It's called concatenating. It just sticks them together with no separations. So if you wanted there to be a separator, I would probably use this right alongside the text and concatenate each individual item with, you can just add a comma to add more text. Here is where I would put the, in double quotes, the comma space, and then drag that down to all except for the last one, because you probably won't want a comma on the last one. So for the last one, just say equals that. And then instead of concatenating this list, I would concatenate this list, which has those delimiters, which is those commas. So now here we have the exact same result. It takes another extra step. But that's a way that I would do it if you don't have TEXTJOIN. For this example, we're taking one more step into the realm of complicated. So instead of just concatenating a bunch of names together, what if we have an identifier column or a category? I'm calling it identifier, but you could also think of it as a category. In this example, here's all the districts, and then there's multiple schools in each district. That can be just 1 or 2. So what if we wanted a list of all the districts and we want to collapse them so that in another cell we have a list of all the schools that are within each district? This is a 2-step process. I'm going to do it over here. The first step is we need that list of districts. So we're going to use the unique function and call this district name column. Because I have this set up as an Excel table, you can see that instead of cell references like B3 to whatever B row, we have the name of the table, which is example 2, and then the name of the column, which is district name. So now I'll close those parentheses, and here we have a spill range, which is a dynamic array, of all the districts. Now right next to it, we're going to use TEXTJOIN, and the first argument is the delimiter, which I'm going to use comma space again. Ignore empty, true. And then the text here, we're not just going to put the school name column because we only want to grab the school names that match this row in the district name column. So we're going to use a function called if. And the first argument is a logical test. So we're going to say if this first district name is equal to, and then grab that district name column again, the whole thing. So it's example 2, which is the table name, and then district name, which is the column name. Then what do we do if that logical test is true? Then we want to return the school name. So this is saying we want to grab all of the school names for any rows where the district name is equal to this cell F3. Then there's one more argument for the if function, and it's what do we do if it's false? Let's just return nothing. So that would be 2 double quotes, which is just a blank space. So we'll close that if function and then close the TEXTJOIN function. And you can see that it did exactly what we wanted to do. It concatenated 1, 2, 3 schools separated by a comma. Now all we have to do is drag this down. And now we have the list for all of these schools, and it's just concatenated all the schools together by district, which is the identifier or the category column. Now, in this example, you may be asking the question, well, what if I have multiple columns that can act as identifiers? So in this case, we have the district name, but we also have a district ID and an enrollment. And you can see that these are the same for each district. So these identifiers apply to the original identifier, which was the district. So we want to collapse these two. We only want to have one row that has each district name, ID number, and enrollment number, and then we want to list the school names like we did before. So here I have set up the results that I want, and this is exactly the same as the previous example. The only difference here is that we're going to add these 2 columns for the district ID and the enrollment. And the way that we do that is we're just going to modify the unique function here. Instead of just calling the district name, actually I'm going to just delete it out, and then I'll show you what happens when you select all of it. So here I'm going to hover over the table header and then select it, and while keeping my finger on the mouse, I'm dragging over so that now it has selected all 3 of these columns, and you can see how it changed the structured reference so that it has the table name, which is example 3, and then inside an outer set of square brackets, it names each column district name with a colon in the middle to enrollment. So that means it's going from the district name to the enrollment. So you can have as many columns here as you need, and it will grab all the unique values. What you have to realize with this is that you have to make sure that there are no random values that don't match up. So if you have, there has to be a one-to-one relationship between these identifier columns. And you can see everything else is the same. So even if you have multiple identifier columns, this still works. In this example, we're expanding the values that we want to return a little bit more. So we still have these 3 identifier columns, and we still have the school name column, but now we have a school ID column. So you can see there's a one-to-one relationship between this school name and school ID. So each school has its own identifier or ID number, and we want to return those 2 in a list. What if we want to collapse? We want a list of the school names and a list of the school IDs in one row. So you can see that these first 3 rows will be collapsed into one row. Well, it's pretty similar to how we've done it before. So we have the unique function is grabbing the identifiers, and then we have a column for the school ID and a column for the school name. I flipped them a little bit just for aesthetics because I like how this was going to look. So let's set up this function. It's actually the same as the function that we used before with a little tweak. So we're going to use TEXTJOIN. And for this one, I want to show you how you can use a different delimiter. This is one of my favorites. It's something to keep in your back pocket. Put it on a post-it note next to your desk if you think you'll use this often. And that is char 10. So you put the number 10 in the char function, and that will give you a line feed. You'll see what that looks like. It's just as if you entered, or you put the enter, you press the enter key on your keyboard. It puts it to a new line. So we're going to ignore empty, true, and then the text, we're going to do the same thing we did before, which is to use the if function. If the district name is equal to the district name column, then we're going to return the school ID column because that's what we're grabbing. If the value is false, we'll use a blank space, and now we'll close both of those functions. And you only see one row happening here, but that's because it's not wrapped. So now I'm going to wrap that text, and you can see the char 10 as the delimiter. Instead of separating these items by a comma, it separated them by a line feed character. And I'm going to drag that down so you can see that each school has its own identifier, and those however many there are, that's how many lines there are. So I'm going to do the same exact thing for the school name column. So I set up the same exact function, except instead of returning the school ID, it's now returning the school name. And then I will double click on this little fill handle to drag that formula down all the way. And you can see it lines up perfectly. So every time there's just one school, there's one ID number. If there's 4 schools, there's 4 ID numbers, and they will match up if you were to go look those up. Now you may be asking, what if I want the school name and the school ID combined on the same line in the same cell? So instead of having them be separated, what if you wanted these all in the same cell? Well, to do that, I would actually create a new column and join together the school name and the school ID before you create the collapsed table. So here we're going to use that great function concat, which we've already talked about, to combine the school name and then comma to give you a new argument. We will use, well, this is how I want to combine it. You can really combine any text you want. You can separate it by a dash or a slash or a space. I'm going to use a space, open parentheses, and then close that double quotes, comma. Then I'm going to enter the school ID, comma. Then I will close those parentheses in double quotes because I want those parentheses to be inside the cell, and then I'll close the parentheses for the concat function. And you can see that now we have a new column called school name and ID, and this is exactly how I want it to be displayed in the summary. So now we'll go over to the summary, which looks the same as we've done before, and we're just going to modify this so that instead of this school name column, we will return the school name and ID column. So if anytime you're using structured references, you can type in the table name and then the first square bracket, and then it will pull up this handy list of all the columns that are in the data. So we'll just select that school name and ID and close the square brackets. And then you can see that this cell has the school names, but it also has that ID in parentheses. So that's how I would do it if I wanted to combine multiple columns into one cell. In this last example, we're going to explore a very powerful solution called PowerQuery. It was released in Excel 2016, so it's really likely that you have access to this. It's not called PowerQuery in the data ribbon though. It's in the data tab, and it's in this group called Get and Transform Data. So your data has to be formatted as an Excel table, which, I've talked about many times. Anytime you have data organized in columns and rows, you should set it up as an Excel table. So you would go to Insert Table. Anyway, back to data. So we're going to be creating a query, which is like a little script that Excel will run to transform this table into another table. We're going to be getting the data from a table or range. So we're going to click on this from table / range, and then it will open this PowerQuery editor, which takes that table and loads it into this editor that we can transform as we want. This is a really cool application because it is menu driven. It's mostly just clicking buttons. We can modify the code, and in fact we will in this example, but you don't have to know very much to be successful with PowerQuery. So starting out, you can see this is exactly a copy of the table. And over here in the applied steps, you can see everything that was done already. So what was done was a source, meaning that the table was loaded into the query editor, and change type, which means it automatically detects any numeric columns and changes them to a numeric data type. You don't really have to worry about that, just leave it, it's totally fine. So the thing that we're gonna do to combine multiple rows is this button here in the Home tab called Group By. So click on this, and as you can see, it's a dialog box. So it's menu driven. You don't have to code, basically. So we're going to change it from basic to advanced. And that's just because we have multiple grouping columns. Remember, we have district name, and I'm going to click add grouping and select that ID column and the enrollment column. So if you don't have multiple grouping columns, you could stick with basic. Now we're going to create a new column name, and I'm going to call this schools. The operation that I want to use is actually going to be to combine them, to merge the text, but the default functions here are only numeric operations. So just choose sum for now. It's going to make an error, but we'll change that later. And then the column that we want to combine is the school name column. Now, if you only had one, you would be done. You just click OK. But since we have two columns so I have school IDs also, two columns to combine, I'm going to just do the same thing with the school ID column. And then click OK. And you can see that it added another step here to the applied steps because we just did something. And you can also see that there's an error in this. To fix this, we're going to modify the code for this step. It's called M code, like the letter M. It's up here in the formula bar. If you don't see the formula bar, just go up to the View tab and check this formula bar checkbox. So I'll expand that so we can see all of it. And I'll tell you exactly what to change. It's not scary. So we're going to look for this word list.sum and change it. We're going to replace it with text.combine. And that's going to replace that sum function that we entered with a combine function because we want to combine all of these. But there's another argument in the text.combine function. So we need to add after the name of your column in square brackets, add a comma, and then the separator in double quotes. So if you wanted to separate your lists by a comma, just like we did before, you would use a comma here. I'm going to show you also how to do the line feed. So a line feed in this context in M code is a £, and then inside parentheses you're going to use LF. So that is how you use a line feed character as a separator. I'm just going to copy this because we have to do it again. Because I have multiple columns that I'm summarizing by, the schools and the school ID, I'm going to do this twice. But if you only had one column, you only have to do this once. So I'm doing the same exact thing, replace list.sum with text.combine, and then add another argument with the separator or the delimiter that you're going to use. So now when you click away from that, you can see it did exactly what I wanted it to do. This is kind of like a preview of the result, and it combined all of the schools into one row. Now to get it into Excel, you need to close and load, and I always click close and load too because you have more control of where it's going. And you can put it, the default is to put it onto a new worksheet. I'm just going to put it onto an existing worksheet. I'm just going to stick it right there. And you can see a queries and connection panel opens up, and it takes a little bit of time to load. So when you if you're using the line feed character, the default is not to have it be wrapped. So I'm going to wrap the text so that I can see those line feeds. And this is exactly what I was looking for. You can modify this any way you want. If you wanted to add more columns to return, you just repeat those steps. If you want to have more identifiers or less identifiers, you could also pre-process these columns the way that we did in the previous example, and then only summarize that one column. But this is a really great way to do it in a repeatable process so that if you had to modify this table at all, or if you needed to add new rows, it's really easy to perform this step again, and you don't have to go through all of what we just did. What you just did was set up the query, but if you edited this original table To rerun all those steps, all you have to do is go up to this query tab and then click refresh, and it just runs those steps again. So if you modify the original table and then refresh the query, it will do all that afresh. Thank you for watching. I'm confident you now have all the tools you need to combine multiple rows into one row in Excel, no matter what that means to you. But I'd love to know what you think. Do you have a situation that I didn't mention? Let me know in the comments.